Hi, thanks for checking out my channel. My name is Tarsha Wiggins. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and certified alcohol and drug counselor. Our topic today is going to be about racial trauma, or another term for it is race-based traumatic stress. With everything going on right now, I live in Wisconsin, there's a lot going on in the city of Kenosha. I'm not too far from there. I thought it'd be very appropriate and timely to talk about trauma in relation to it being charged or experienced when it's in relation to race. But before we jump into content, you'll hear me say every video, these videos are intended to be of educational value, not intended for you to treat yourself independently. Certainly consult a behavioral health professional if you have any concerns or questions about your own mental health or the mental health of a loved one. So now that that's out of the way, let's jump into the content. It's just been a very racially charged year. And even saying that, it makes me think about all the other years of my life and all the other years of existence for African Americans has not been racially charged. But I think right now with COVID and everything else that's been going on, there's nothing else to distract us from what we're seeing right now. The multiple murders of Black men, women, and children. And just really resonating with me, having three children of my own, three Black boys particularly, and having to have some conversations with them about race and why we're treated a particular way. And when I say why we, I mean Black people, why we're treated a particular way, and trying to explain that when they don't understand racism or they haven't experienced it to that degree, and starting to have those conversations, and also seeing the pain and the hurt in their eyes when you have to explain to your child that a Black man was shot in his back 7 times, and an 11-year-old can conceptualize it doesn't take 7 bullets to stop him. So after having some of those talks, looking at all the things in the media, and also doing my own internal self-check and making sure I'm staying mentally and emotionally well, it just really put me in a space of thinking about how other people are taking this information in. I want to just talk about that. I think this year has been very heavy with COVID, and then all the racial issues and stigmas and problems in the world. And it just made me really give some thought to how is that impacting our mental health. We've talked about trauma, we've talked about depression, we've talked about substance use, but it also made me start thinking about how we watch these encounters over and over again, and not the same incident, multiple situations, murders that's being played out on the news, YouTube, TMZ, all sources of media, how we watch this over and over again, and how that's affecting our mental health. Oftentimes we'll see that in the form of anxiety, hyperarousal, some type of traumatic stress disorder. But I think it's particularly helpful that we talk about how race-based traumatic stress affects us too. So just wanting to break that term down, this actually is a theory that was developed by an individual. I can't recall his name. I'm so sorry. I can't recall his name, but I want to break the theory down though. What it ultimately refers to is that mental health and emotional injury is caused by encounters with racial bias and ethnic discrimination, racism, and hate crimes. So essentially, you experience racism or racially biased situations or ethnic discrimination over and over and over again, or maybe just one really intense, emotionally charged situation that causes an emotional injury to us. After you have sustained multiple or maybe prolonged experiences of emotional injury, that can begin to manifest and or present with symptoms that look very much like post-traumatic stress disorder, or symptoms that look like or that coincide with anxiety disorder or depression. So I think it's important that we take some time and we do those internal self-checks for ourselves, for our loved ones, our children particularly, as we start to talk about some of these situations, and really give some insight and some thought to if what we're feeling, are we experiencing racial-based traumatic stress? Are we having multiple consecutive emotional injuries to ourselves? the death of Breonna Taylor, the murder of Breonna Taylor, how we watched that, we heard about it. George Floyd, we watched it over and over and over. These are emotional injuries to ourselves. And when we experience that for a long period of time, or a really intense experience, when I talk about how that those emotional injuries can also begin to manifest with symptoms that are similar to post-traumatic stress or anxiety, what we may start to see in ourselves or our loved ones is depression. We may start to see anger and just not being able to identify, why am I so angry? It's just when you just have this unresolved in you and you're just angry about everything, and you're just like really short and maybe snappy with everyone around you, even if they've done nothing to you. We also may start to see reoccurring thoughts of the experience. Maybe this isn't something that happened to you, but you can't stop thinking about it. You feel it, or you're thinking about it over and over, or you're experiencing it over and over in your mind, but just in different circumstances. Other things we may see when we talk about the symptoms, particularly in relation to post-traumatic stress disorders, we start to have physical reactions, maybe headaches, chest pain. Maybe you start to feel increase in your heart rate. Those are physical reactions in terms of when you have that emotional injury. Maybe you're reliving those experiences. Maybe you are having that imagery at night before you fall asleep, or maybe your children go to leave and you start to have these thoughts and seeing your children in situations like that. Other things that's particularly associated with post-traumatic stress disorder is hypervigilance. And it's a difficult thing to navigate at times, because I feel, as being a Black woman or raising Black children, there's a level of hypervigilance that keeps you safe. You need to be hypervigilant to some degree. There's things about that can keep you alive. Drive safely, buckle up, be respectful, but also being aware of your surroundings. Where are you going? What time of day is it? What's the cultural climate like? Those things would be considered hypervigilance. But if you don't employ some of those things, you can find yourself in situations where you're unsafe. And that may only be applicable, unfortunately, to African Americans right now, that if you're not hypervigilant, you're not aware, you're not alert about certain things, you are putting yourself at risk for being shot 7 times in your back, being killed by the police, because of the cultural climate we're in, and the changes that haven't been made yet. And I say yet because I am expecting change. We have to do better. Other things that we may experience, or symptoms that may present that are in correlation to post-traumatic stress disorder, is just this mental distancing. Your thought, your judgment is just kind of clouded. You're just in a place where it's just blah. That's also associated with depression. You start to feel numb to situations. This is, sometimes you can see images of murder and brutality and violence, and you can become numb to those things. And that's just as dangerous as becoming hypervigilant and becoming angry and wanting to act in a violent way. When you become numb to it, you're desensitized. It means nothing to you, right? So those are things that we want to be mindful of. Other things I think that we should discuss a little bit is like, well, how do I experience it? Maybe you're saying, well, yeah, I think I'm experiencing what you're talking about, this race-based trauma, all these accounts of things that's happened. I keep experiencing it. I see it over and over. How can I limit that, or how can I identify it? It happens in a couple of different forms. The first one being direct, a direct interaction, meaning you yourself experience the racist or ethnic discrimination at first hand. The second is vicarious, meaning through another source, like through the TV, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you name it. If you're watching it and consuming it through another person or through another means, that would be vicarious. Another way that this racial based trauma can occur is through generational. There's this thing of there's this mentality. Well, I've heard it talked about, like the slave mentality, or where generational trauma is passed down. What was taught or what was endured by our great grandparents, that thought process, that oppression, those things that they experienced, it became coded in their DNA. And that has just been passed down and passed down and passed down. And it makes some of us genetically predispositioned to experience trauma, to experience stressors in a way that causes harm to us significantly. I think I may follow this video up with some discussion about epigenetic trauma, and just talking more about how does that history and that DNA play into us and how we respond to things today. I also want to talk a little bit about, what race-based trauma is, what it may look like, the symptoms that we've already discussed, how we can identify the sources of it, because we have to be mindful. There are times where we need to turn the TV off, Twitter off, YouTube off, TMZ off. We need to distance ourselves so that we can stay well here. That's not a means of avoidance so that we can be naive to the situations around us, but we have to safeguard our mind. We have to safeguard our emotional stability as well. And only you can do that for yourself. So that's just something to take away, because as we start to transition a little bit and start talking about, well, what do I do about it? Okay, so what you've talked about today, this race-based traumatic stress, I think I've experienced that. I've experienced some of the things that you talked about in terms of some of the symptoms. I do feel like maybe I'm anxious, I'm hypervigilant, I feel just distanced, tired, drained. All of those things we talked about today. We talked a little bit about how to identify those sources or those ongoing emotional injuries so that I can limit that. But what else do I do? You have to be the best and healthiest person you can be. And a lot of times that's going to be trying to limit the exposure and getting yourself connected with someone or a support system. Now, the purpose of me creating this channel was to reduce the stigma behind mental illness. So certainly I will always advocate, talk to a professional, but make sure you're talking to the right professional. If you connect with a therapist or a psychologist and you just don't vibe with that person, you just feel like, this isn't working for me. I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe. It's not working for me. Don't stop at that one person. This is no different than buying a pair of shoes. Most of us ladies will go to the store. We want to try it in this size, this color, this length of the heel. We'll do all of that. But when it comes to taking care of our mental and emotional health, we just want to stop at one person. Well, I didn't like that person. It's not a good fit for me. And we want to just move on. But in this instance, what I'm encouraging that we do is you get connected with a good support system. Church, family, positive, encouraging people around you. There is so much support and camaraderie with other people that feel what you feel, can encourage you through those difficult moments, and also coach you through some of that as well. And then, of course, talking with a behavioral health professional, someone you feel comfortable with, obviously, but talking with them about what you're experiencing, because ultimately what the goal is to be able to identify some of the symptoms, work through what those things are so that you can manage those emotional responses in a healthy and safe way. That's all I have for us today. Stay well, stay safe. Again, we want to reduce the stigma around mental illness in our communities, but most importantly, we can't do that without taking good care of ourselves. And there's so much going on right now in the world just with COVID, race issues, hate, just all of this stuff that's going on around us. It's important that we take time to check on ourselves and check on someone that you love as well. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you found this content helpful. Share with someone else, and I'll see you in the next video.